Okay. Hi, everyone. Good evening. This is an amazing turnout. Hello. Hello to everyone. So I'm Carmen Abrego. It's so very nice and it's an honor. I'm thrilled to be here. This is very exciting. I've been looking forward to this program, this book launch event for a couple of weeks now. More than a couple of weeks. I feel like it's all been coming together, over the last couple of months, I should say, as we all were anticipating the release of your first collection of stories, the book that I have right here, of course, Women of Fire and Snow, by the author Nati Del Paso. She's here with us, of course, and we will hear from her. And as she mentioned earlier, from another special guest who I will have the honor of introducing. But I just wanted to say, in addition to saying hello, and I know that many of us are joining today from different parts of North America. Is that right, Nati?
And Mexico. Well, North
Right.
America, yes.
Right, North America.
I just did what Mexicans hate.
So, yeah, so all of us are here together for a very special event. And of course, that is the book launch of Women of Fire and Snow. So a little bit about myself. I don't know, there's several here, several people I don't know. Many of you I do not know, but a little bit about myself. So I work for the Houston Public Library, and I've worked in publishing for many years. I want to say I've worked in the book industry for over 20 years and have introduced many programs over the past year, of course, virtually, but programs that have taken place at public libraries in person, and have always had the honor of introducing authors and having them read and you know, seeing how meaningful it is for authors and readers to connect. And so that's what this is this evening. And I'm thrilled about it because Nati is very near and dear to me. So with that, I want to turn the program over to you, Nati. And when you're ready, I'm happy to introduce Alejandra when she joins us. Does that work?
Yes, that works.
You can see Nati now. We have Alejandra joining us. Alejandra, I'm Carmen. It's so nice to meet you. It's an honor. And so I am going to introduce you for everyone here and then turn the program over. So Alejandra Alguera Altemer is a Mexican lawyer specializing in grave human rights violations, particularly sexual violence against women. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in law from the Universidad, I practiced this, now I'm going to get it wrong, Iberoamericana, Puebla, and she holds a master's in law from Harvard Law School. Alejandra worked with the International Human Rights Clinic. Then she was awarded the Henningsen Fellowship to work with Legal Action Worldwide in Kenya on conflict-related sexual violence in South Sudan and Somalia. While in Latin America, Alejandra has worked with the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, Human Rights Watch, the German Aid Agency in Mexico, the Argentinian chapter of the Inter-American Platform for Human Rights, Democracy and Development on their sex trafficking projects, as well as with the follow-up mechanism to the Belém do Pará Convention, where she contributed in the drafting of the general recommendation on disappearances of women and girls and the model feminicide law. Alejandra is a lawyer with the Human Rights Center Miguel Agustín Pro Juárez in Mexico. I think everyone can join me from wherever you are at in a round of applause, in a, this honor for who you are and the work that you do, Alejandra. So thank you. And I turn the program over to you.
Hi, Carmen. Thank you so much for the kind welcome. It's also so nice to meet you. I've heard so much about you. And I am so incredibly sorry I'm late. Everything just kind of went crazy with Mexico City traffic, but I'm really sorry now I'm here. And I think also what Carmen just shared is missing, that I was also Vito's intern for a summer. I think I should add that because it was so awesome. So next time I'll add it. So anyway, again, I'm sorry. I'm so glad, Nati, to be here with you, and it's super exciting, your book. And yeah, I'm super grateful that you invited me to talk a bit here tonight. So thank you again. So Nati asked me to share a bit about violence against women. So I will try to make it concise, but if I go over time, just please stop me. Or if I start speaking too fast because I get passionate, also stop me. So anyway, I'll just start. So in general terms, violence against women is deeply related with discrimination against women. It kind of works both ways. And I know I'm not telling you anything that you don't know already, but it's good to start. So it's a form of discrimination in itself because it affects women in specific ways, right? And it's also used to keep women in place. So for instance, some of you might have heard before of lesbian women, for instance, being victims of sexual violence to be kept in their place, so-called kept in their place. Or for instance, women who break gender stereotypes and work or do whatever in a very patriarchal society, and then they are victims of intimate partner violence to be kept in their place again. So it shows discrimination in that way, and it's also a symptom of inequality in itself. So it's always both ways in discrimination. And there is violence everywhere. People tend to say, oh, there's no discrimination against women, therefore there is no violence against women in Sweden, but that's not true. Violence might just take different forms. So there's violence basically everywhere because there's discrimination everywhere, but it works different in each place. And the places that I've been able to work in, I've seen that the same forms of violence that I've seen in other places occur differently depending on where you are and how patriarchy sort of drifts into society in different ways, although it's always the same principle. And another thing that is deeply disturbing or concerning about violence against women is lack of access to justice, for instance. And as you can imagine, it's incredibly hard for women anywhere to access justice, even in Sweden or in Mexico or whatever country that we talk about. It's incredibly hard. And it relates to different things, but mostly because of gender stereotypes. So all the stories that we hear about women filing criminal complaints for intimate partner violence, for instance, and then police not taking those, or even prosecutors' offices, they are taking into account gender stereotypes. Or in Mexico, it's very common that people will file criminal complaints for disappearances of women, and they won't take the reports because they think that they went with their boyfriends or that they're partying. And that's all gender stereotypes. So that's the first step that is very hard to get through to access justice. And if you manage that, then you have the prosecutor. And then the prosecutor might not investigate your case with gender perspective, for instance, looking at evidence, thinking on how things might affect you different than a man, for instance. And then that's very hard because they are the ones that take cases to judges. So if you manage to get through the prosecutor, then you have a judge who might also not be able to evaluate the evidence of your case accordingly, right? So it's very hard to access justice. It does still happen, but it's very hard, and it might become harder depending on what kind of violence we're talking about. That we're also going to get to that in a second. But because gender stereotypes are such a big deal, they're illegal, for instance, under international law. And I think that the worst gender stereotype is the assumption that we consent to violence. So if you look at the Me Too movement, everyone was always asking, why didn't they come forward before? And the question behind that is always because they think survivors kind of consented or they liked it. Or when you file a report for intimate partner violence, then the police might be, why didn't you leave before? Why are you staying? It's because they think we are consenting to it. So the biggest gender stereotype for me is this idea of permanent consent to violence from women, and it kind of permeates everything. And then also justice is different for everyone. So accessing it might also be hard because you don't identify with the type of justice that is offered to you by courts, for instance. So some people just want recognition for what happened to them. And some people, which might come from another place, some people want an apology. Some women want their day in court. They want to feel heard even if the perpetrator is not convicted, but they want their day in court. And in some cases, they just want to face perpetrators, and that is enough. For instance, in the organization where I work, we accompany the case of a woman whose mother went missing over 40 years ago. And what is very valuable to her is that she's getting to face the perpetrators of that disappearance, even if that doesn't mean finding out where her mom is. So those are very different types of justice, and we always think about justice as a goal, but it's also a process. So it's very specific to the person that we're talking about. And speaking of forms of violence against women, there are many forms of violence against women. One of them, of course, is intimate partner violence that it's very discussed also in Nati's stories, and it's very generalized, which is also very sad, but it relates to other forms of violence like femicide, for instance, that is a gender-based killing of women, and is a very big deal in Mexico, for instance. And by that I mean that there's a lot of attention on the issue, although it's been happening for a really long time. There's also disappearances of women which are also related to femicide and other types of violence. And within sexual violence, there's many forms of violence, right? It's rape might be the generic one, but there's sexual torture, there's sex trafficking, and there's also conflict-related sexual violence, which is the one that happens when there's war, basically, and used to be thought of as something that was kind of sideways to the war. It was just like collateral damage, but it's not. It's a way of terrorizing populations, not only the women, but also the men in communities. So it serves a lot of purposes in war. That's why people say it's a weapon of war. And that's another form of violence. But then we also have to think about something that Nati really touches on in her stories, which is intersectionality. We didn't used to do that before, but then a feminist whose name is Kimberly Crenshaw kind of coined the term. And it basically means looking at other situations that might affect women differently. So migrants, like women who are migrants, have different effects of violence, and they might be more vulnerable to some types of violence than other women. For instance, in Mexico, it happens a lot that women who are migrants and who are undocumented here are easier to be subjected to sex trafficking, for instance, because they won't go to authorities because they don't have documents. So everything becomes more and more complex when you add on those issues, and it's also applies for forced migration, for instance, that Nati also touches upon, and that's very similar to displacement. So when women are displaced, all unequal structures play against them, and this also applies obviously for African American women and for everyone who has another reason to be so-called vulnerable to forms of violence. And this is very important because we sometimes kind of forget this. So white feminism tends to forget this, for instance. So there were very interesting studies about safe houses for women who had been victims of intimate partner violence, and they had to speak English. This was in the US. So they could come into the safe house, and then all migrant women could not be in the safe houses. And no one had thought about this because they were not in that situation or hadn't heard of this specific issues before. And it's also important to know that women have not necessarily just stood by while this happened. Women have really organized around this. And this is very important because we keep falling on the victim concept, and then we put these women in boxes when they're subjects of rights. And this means that that they can speak for themselves, that they can decide what they want for their cases, what kind of justice they want, if they want any justice as we understand it at all. And this is very important for policy, because this is also patriarchy, right? You objectify women when they're victims of, you make them victims of violence, and then you objectify them again when you decide that they cannot make decisions about their own cases or about the policy that they want for their situation. So this is very important. I recently heard a woman who we work with in my organization, who was saying that she was a victim of sexual torture in Atenco in 2006. And she said that she being victimized didn't make her a victim, like her person or the concept of herself was not a victim, that it was a moment in her life, but that she was more than that. And I think that's very, very nice and very interesting to hear, like, this is only a moment and this does not define me. So women have really organized around these issues. It's because of women that there are laws, international treaties, general awareness, and authorities are starting to respond. It depends where we look at, but for instance, Mexico is a good example. They're starting to respond because women have organized so well around these issues. And that's also why I think after all these horrible things that I have shared with you, that what we can do is organize, that we can listen to each other and believe each other, which is a very big issue, the lack of belief in the experiences of other women. Also speak up if you can about the situations that you face, and as Nati is doing, donate. Because civil society is really broke generally, so it's very important to donate. And CEDEM, where the pre-sales are going of Nati's book, it does incredible work in Chihuahua, which is really known also for big cases on femicide. And they've done amazing work, so it's great that you're donating the money there, Nati. And well, yeah, I tried to be quick, but I think I wasn't that much. But anyway, thank you so much again, Nati, and I hope that this presentation wasn't too fast and covered too much. Thank you.